Denaro is a mafia boss from the province of Trapani, and he has a deep pedigree. His father was a big shot mafioso back in the day, and Denaro and his family sided with Toto Riina during the big mafia wars of the 80s and early 90s. Very bloody. I mean, hundreds of people were killed. I wouldn't say he was the capo di tutti capi, like in a formal sense. I don't think that's true in terms of like an actual title, but de facto, I think that once Provenzano and Toto Riina and those guys died off, Denaro became, I think, the de facto most powerful Don in Sicily. He was hiding in plain sight for the last 30 years. It's difficult for me to believe, John, that with drones and wiretaps and you know, people talking, that they had no idea where he was for the last 30 years. So
hiding in plain sight sometimes, I guess, is the best way to go. It worked for him. And it worked for all, you know, all three bosses, himself, Toto Riina, and Provenzano, all were caught in Sicily. What does that tell you?
State, I'm guessing, either knew where he was and looked the other way, or they just weren't looking very hard. Still some problems in the Italian state in terms of this criminal political nexus, you know, people that are interconnected with organized crime elements in the government in Italy.
There's a lot of corruption with their politicians there.
Yeah, and would you say, my sense is that, again, this is an unfolding story, so I'm just speculating here in all fairness. I wouldn't be surprised if someone in the organization gave him up because they knew he was vulnerable. He's has cancer. And if someone didn't give him up, knowing that they could ascend now, they could rise to the top position with him out of the way, and maybe some agreement with the government that the government now lays off of me for at least a while because I gave up Denaro.
From what I gathered, it's not how he was caught. I don't believe anyone turned him in.
How long do you think they had him under surveillance before they grabbed him? They got him at the hospital in Palermo, either about to receive or following receiving his chemo treatment.
First of all, he made a very, very big blunder. If you're going to use someone's ID, do not use the ID of the son of a boss. And that's basically what he did. As far as surveillance, why they didn't pick him up at the house, I don't know, because they did know the address. I don't know, did they surveil the house? They had to, right? Why didn't they pick him up at the house? I don't know, but I guess they figured the best place to grab him is in the hospital.
Also, let me ask you, John, do you think the politics of the situation, as far as I can tell, Denaro is one of the last holdouts from the Toto Riina era. Would you say the power shift is now totally back to Palermo, the old school, like in Zerillos and those old school clans?
I would go out on a limb and say that that's where it's going to be.
Another thing that I suspect, and I know you've talked about this on your show, John, that it's another indication that not only the power shifting from the Toto Riina allies to Palermo, but more generally across Italia, the power shifting from Sicily to Calabria.
The power has shifted from Sicily to Calabria.
John, why don't you talk about how you got introduced into I know we talked a little bit about this the first time that you were on the podcast, talked about Matteo Messina, but maybe in this, talk a little bit about how you got introduced into this particular faction that's running the family today, specifically Big Mike DeSantis, Patty Red Della Russo, and Andrew DeSimone.
Originally met Patty up in the Bronx at the club, but I started staying with Patty through Louis. I met Patty as a friend, obviously, in the Bronx, and was introduced to him at the Ottawa Social Club in the Bronx. Mikey DeSantis, I met because they put him in our crew, which is the Brooklyn faction.
Mikey DeSantis is a guy that was known as an enforcer, right? I mean, earlier in his career, I know there was a situation with Al DiArco, who was an acting boss for Vic Amuso, who flipped. And he said the reason he flipped because he was in a hotel room when he saw DeSantis, and he in his mind did the math and figured that DeSantis was there to kill him. So he got out of the hotel room. So Mike DeSantis had a reputation, 30 years ago as a tough guy. At some point in the last 5, 6, 7 years, Vic Amuso made the decision to name him acting boss. What is that something that when you first met him, you saw Mike DeSantis as someone that had a boss material?
No, I don't know about boss material, but ultimately Vic made the decision, but it wasn't Vic's idea. They brought it to Vic.
The DeSantis, Della Russo DeSimone triumvirate that runs the family now, allegedly, replaced Matty Madonna and Stevie Wonder Crea. And the Brooklyn guys want to make sure that it's not Bronx guys replacing Crea and Madonna.
First of all, as far as Stevie goes, and that's Stevie Crea, I've never once heard anybody in the street call him Stevie Wonder. Stevie was out there. Matty and Joe DiNapoli was a consigliere. That was the administration. Matty and Joe were in on the gambling case in New Jersey. When the indictment came down, now Stevie was part of that indictment, and now the whole administration was out. So to answer your question, yes, that's when the letter went to Vic. They knew, had that letter not gone to Vic, Stevie would have put Bronx people in those positions, and the base of power still would have been in the Bronx. Brooklyn never liked the Bronx as far as the Lucchese family goes. We were hoping that it was going to go smoothly the way it didn't. If it didn't, we were taking guys from the Bronx out. That was a definite.
You were on the, just so people know, John was in the Brooklyn faction. So he was in the faction that was taking over the power, not the faction that was being relieved of the power.
No, we were the guys that were making the move for power. If it does not go smoothly, we were taking certain guys in the Bronx out. Target number one was Stevie Crea.
Was Stevie Crea someone that ego was very bruised by this? Like, was he offended that Vic was sending word that you got to get out of the way?
If he was, he didn't show it. He went along with it. What happened is, how this whole case came about was that pulled a move against Michael Melnish that took my breath away. I couldn't believe that he did this, especially that he's a sitting boss today.
You know, what kind of guy is Patty Red? I know there was, he has a reputation.
You don't want me to curse, do you? My mother named him best because he's got that complex. Patty always thought he was the smartest guy in the room. Patty was very underhanded, proved that to me in the end. Foolishly, again, I repeated that to Patty. Do you know what his reply was? I don't want to call him a Machiavelli because he doesn't have Machiavelli's intelligence. At that wake, guys from the Bronx that I've known wanted to introduce me to Andrew. Did an introduction. I shook his hand, said hello, and that was it. That's my only dealings with Andrew. We didn't know too much about the Bronx. We didn't care about that. You had the base of power in the Bronx, right? They were stripped of it, and it was pulled back to Brooklyn. It's almost like spanking the dog and then giving him a bone. Gas Pipe and Vic with this guy, Buddy Luongo, right? They snuffed him.
They killed him. They made him an acting boss, and then they whacked him.
But the Lucchese family in itself is a Harlem, Bronx-based family. It was always that way.
I've been starting to report a little bit.
What are you going to say?
It looks like there's been some cross-pollination between the Lucchese's and the Chicago outfit.
I'm going to give it to you briefly. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a very brief answer. The only thing I'll say about this is that what a lot of people don't understand is here's how this story will end.
Lorenzo Menino, who is the reputed acting boss or street boss of the Gambinos, is under the spotlight by the feds right now.
Lorenzo started out as a regular guy. Lorenzo was not a street guy. Lorenzo is a guy that there's certain guys that are liked by everyone. Lenny DiMaria with the Gambinos is like that, and Lorenzo is like that. When you're talking about Cherry Hill Gambino money, they could have probably went on national TV and said who you are, and they would be shelved. Meanwhile, they said it was the FBI, and then they turned around and says that the FBI didn't like that I was writing and wanted to shut me down. I think they're a little confused. It's a more peaceful life, so that's why.
The way that you're approaching it and the way that you handle it, it seems like this is kind of the blueprint for transitioning. I guess we use that word now. Transitioning from a crazy, living a life of a movie script to, being a regular, civilian, paying your taxes and not getting involved. I mean, and again, not to go too far off subject, but he ain't one of these guys that you can go jump on YouTube and find a million different videos throwing shade back and forth.
You want to go to war? We'll go to war. Let's go.
So Jimmy, this is it. Ben, thank you for the producing. John, thank you for joining us. And I'm sure we'll have John back on at some point in the near future. And for Jimmy and for Ben and for John, I'm Scott Bernstein, OG Podcast out.